Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hope you're all doing well today. This is another Thursday guest webinar at Exceptional Individuals. This is our second guest webinar of the year, and we have a really special guest today that I'm incredibly excited for. A little bit about us, an organization. We are Exceptional Individuals, and we are a employment support organization for neurodivergent people. We specialize in dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD. Let's get to the meat of the day. We have got a phenomenal guest. We have Nelya Koteyko, and they are the Professor of Language and Communication at Queen's Mary University. What makes this particularly special for me is that when I was doing my master's project, I used Nelya's research data for my own analysis. Their communication work on autistic communities is honestly groundbreaking and really interesting. They specialize in health, science. They talk about different identities. They have large scale models and analyze it. They look at autistic communities and what does it mean? Why did they form? What language has come up from it? They have done lots of projects, including autistic adults online and autism in affinity spaces, as well as looking at risk, stigma, and trust in media and policy. You are in very good, capable hands today. With that said, I think it's time to bring on our guest. Nelya, it is an absolute pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks, Nat. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for coming. I'm really delighted to be here, but also to see a growing interest in the topic. Perhaps I'll start by saying a couple of words about my research. My research is in the field of applied linguistics, which is about understanding the choices we make when we communicate, how we phrase things in specific settings, for example, in business settings or in doctor's office. We as applied linguists always focus on context. In this sense, applied linguistics is already fundamentally aligned with the neurodiversity paradigm because we talk about differences rather than impaired communicative abilities. We talk about socializing preferences, for example. Back in 2020, we as applied linguists collaborated with the autistic community and human-computer interaction designers to find answers to the questions on this slide. All right, so the questions are, how suitable are mainstream social media platforms for autistic adults socializing and sensory preferences? What can we learn from Autistic Sociality about the design of social media platforms? Neurodevelopmental differences in autism necessitate support, but we know that not all groups receive this support equally. When it comes to autistic adults without intellectual disabilities, at least back in 2020, there was very limited support in terms of social support, healthcare, but also communication in the workplace. Basically, people were left to figure out themselves how to communicate in employment or on different social media websites, interaction websites, because these were not designed with autistic people in mind. Before I go to my next slide, where I'm going to unpack a bit what are these socializing preferences, can we have a quick poll?
The question is, do you think social media works well for you? We've got yes, no, or sometimes.
Could I move on to the next slide and then we come back to the overall results?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Okay. So what kind of socializing differences and sensory needs and preferences? Actually, I don't think I need to unpack this too much for this audience, but just in case we have people who are not familiar with autism and neurodiversity paradigm, I thought that a quote from one of our workshop participants illustrates things nicely. They said, I haven't mixed with other autistic people before, and I can't hold a conversation with a non-autistic person. So life is very much a struggle for me. I'd never have said I'm unintelligent. After all, I've got lots of qualifications. But understanding words, meanings, faces, instructions, and directions, I just can't. In research, in applied linguistics research and in clinical psychology, we know that there's a particular way of communicating when we talk about autistic communication. It is known as Autistic Sociality. One of their theories is called monotropism, proposed by Dina Murray, and it is about tendency to focus on relatively few things and to tune out others outside of this attention tunnel, as it were. This also translates into a particular way of interacting. We know autistic people have focused interests where they prefer to talk about specific things rather than general things. They prefer to have structured interaction and way of communicating direct language. Conversely, when autistic people have to communicate with non-autistics, they talk about socially based sociality. And that's where we have vague language, politeness, indirectness, and small talk. All right, so if we could check the results of our poll now, just to see how many are happy with their experiences with social media. For 19 people, it works sometimes. No, we have 6 and 5 yes. So we know that some things are not working, right? And as I've said, that's probably because the sites were not designed collaboratively with autistic people as a group. Going back to our project, right? We know that these differences in communication exist. They were mostly studied in offline settings. So we as linguists wanted to know if they work online, when people interact online, whether they translate into similar things or whether there are unique practices and unique preferences. But also, we wanted to know how to adapt social media design, specifically for interaction. To be fair, the guidelines for design for disability, such guidelines exist and existed back at the time. But at least back in 2020, it was quite limited. For example, software design guidelines would speak about access, right? We need to make sure that we simplify structures and practices for autistic people. Down the line, if you read, usually there's a mention of intellectual disabilities, hence the need to simplify. This is valid and needed, but it's quite limited. If we talk about adults without intellectual disabilities, if we talk about specific preferences for socializing, then we need more guidance to see how we can enable that. And that's what we started to do with our project. The project, as you can see, consisted of 3 main stages. The first 2 were focused on linguistic analysis, so the analysis of language used by our participants as they interacted on different social media platforms. I don't have time to focus on this, so I'm going to focus on the stage you can see in yellow, slightly orange, right? Not the green ones, but the interviews and workshops. These are 12 co-design workshops we had via Zoom with 20 autistic participants. In terms of composition, you can see we have 6 identified as non-binary or agender, 9 female, 4 male, and 1 undisclosed. Okay, for those who are not familiar with participatory design, the main idea there is that technology users are not customers or consumers. They are neither a source of information for technologists nor evaluators of a final product. Instead, they become active contributors of design ideas at the outset, right, from the very beginning, and they are decision makers in the technology design process. How did we involve the autistic collaborators to discuss with us what needs changing about social media platforms, what works, what doesn't, and what kinds of features we would ideally like to see? Our collaborators in human-computer interaction design proposed to engage people through the concept of creating specific cards. We wanted the card to be physical, material, as well as in a digital form. So that was an option. People were sent these physical cards in the post. They would be asked to arrange them in a particular way. Then the final result, they could take a picture and send to us if they preferred. Alternatively, they could use a software, the digital whiteboard called Miro. This is all about arranging ideas and entities on the board in particular ways. All right, we decided the whole workshops will be composed as a 3-part process, from describe to reflection and then actually making. And this is making the features we would ideally like to see on social media platforms. For the description stage, we decided to go back to the evidence we already had at the time about what autistic participants do on social media. Remember those stages in green? That's the language and linguistic practices people do. We summarized the results, summarized the evidence we already had on the card. Here you can see a physical card. So short snippets about our findings. Hopefully you can make out a sentence there. Results of observation show a clear preference for replies. The idea here is that we do not just help people to start thinking about things, right? We give some kind of prompt. We want to see whether findings resonate with people or not. This evidence was arranged thematically through the cards, can be done in physical at a person's home, and it was also done like this on the screen, so on that digital platform, Miro. Then we asked participants to comment and to discuss and to engage with specific topics they would see on the screen. That was one set of workshops. After that, we summarize what we have and we proceed to the next stage. We thought that on the basis of some of the initial views that participants gave us, that it would make sense to probe a bit more into some of the challenges, maybe some of the benefits that people reported. A good way to do that is through questionable concepts. These are deliberately controversial concepts. They don't necessarily exist in real life. Some of them were quite controversial, so they probably are not the candidates to be implemented in the future. But they are quite a good way to spur discussion, to encourage engagement. They are also quite humorous. They indeed engendered a very lively discussion among participants. The example you see there, again, it's a card where you can scan the code and you can see how the feature works. This one is called translator, so translating neurotypical stuff into autistic way of understanding and doing things. In this case, it removes neurotypical noise from social media threads. No emojis, no gifs, no rudeness, and no smarty pants comments, just the fact. That's what our participants voiced in the previous stages of the project. A focus on the fact, a focus on specific things rather than this noise we frequently see on social media platforms. And the results, an example of how a feature would do it, you can see there on the right for me. In response to a dangerous maneuver by a Tesco delivery, found that endangered a cyclist, right? Then summary of comments posted, just the number of types, not the different emojis. Further down, breakdown of fact there. That's one. There were quite a few different features. I'm showing just a couple. Another one is the small talkifier. This is the opposite. If you want to take an autistic post, for example, social media post, and you want to address it at, let's say, neurotypical person, right? Then you would small talkify it. You would add less direct language, right? More politeness, more small talk. Add the useless niceties to your social media posts and make them more palatable to neurotypical sensitivities. Do not waste time and effort. The small talkifier do the heavy lifting. There would be an example of how it converts the post to this result. All right, so through these stages, we were able to gauge the views, gather evidence on what works and what doesn't. Now we needed to move to the next stage to actually create the features. Our participants would be creating the features in collaboration with each other and also with some input from us, although we were mostly involved as facilitators of the process. Again, we have physical cards here, and there are 3 types. You can see participants sorting them in some of the other workshops. We had blue cards. blue or blue-grayish, as you can see there. These were about actions, both actions that exist on social media, such as delete or share, but also feasible actions, such as remind me. On this one side of the card, you can see the name for the action. If you turn it around, you can see description, what it does. Orange cards were about entities or things, such as rudeness, right? We know that participants rate rudeness and bullying on social media as one of the issues. Last of all, the white cards, which are about things that are missing. Participant can put either an action or an entity themselves and give this meaning. The arrangement of all the cards, that's the choice. A participant would face all of these cards and would be asked to arrange them in particular order. They decide on how they arrange them to achieve a specific feature they want to see. I'm going to describe some of the features. There were close to 40 features proposed by our participants. I'm not going to cover all of that. There's a link to the website where you can find most of our work. So not just publications, but the toolkits I'm going to introduce. There are also links to open source repositories where you can see the actual cards. Okay, so some of the very interesting features which were suggested. Participants were asked to arrange the cards to give a short title to the feature and also give a short paragraph explaining what it is about and how it is supposed to work. Here we can see 2 blue cards. These are actions such as search and connect. We have an orange card for entity, which is stranger. And participant called this connect by interest. They said, maybe I want to talk to more people who are interested in autistic parenting, or I want to talk to people who are interested in washing machines. I'm thinking, I'm really interested in this. I'd love to meet more people who like those things. So I'd like to be able to search that way, find some people, and then decide whether to connect with them or not. This was explicitly put forward in contrast to suggestions given by algorithms, right? To these prompts we sometimes see in terms of proposed connections. The next one, in terms of actions, we see delete and scroll through. Moving images is a blank card which participants added themselves. Then we have voice, audio, and feed as a timeline. The participant called this activate stillness. As you can guess, this has to do with the feelings of overwhelm, going back to sensory preferences, which many participants raised as an issue, right? Being bombarded with still or moving images and audio which switches on. The participant said, sometimes you want your scrolling to just be pictures and text. No sound and no moving images, because when you put headphones in it can be quite really startling. So remove any moving images to have a calmer scrolling where things are still and where you're just looking at still images and text. Okay, last one for now for this presentation was about emojis. It was quite a popular topic and there was a significant discussion around this. Interpreting emojis, making sure the emojis participant uses are interpreted in the right way, and all these various misunderstandings which can happen on social media. We have explain and delete, and then we have emojis and visual content. Here participants talks about alternatives. Maybe use something else visual instead to mean happy or sad or whatever. Maybe like the sun, I would see it as being like happy and cheerful. Unlike maybe dark clouds, I'd see it as being sad. I do better in a more artistic way. I could see the picture rather than seeing faces. I just don't get people's faces at all. Of course, this relates to the high prevalence among autistic population, as we know, inability to interpret one's own emotions, and in this case, to put a label on emotion. Okay, so these are some of our features, and I'm gonna summarize them in a bit. But before I go there, could you tell us in a few words, how do you think social media could be better for you? There are already options. We could take a minute because it takes more time than just saying yes or no, but we could also continue with this as I talk, and we come back to this in a couple of slides, if that's okay. Okay, so if I could move on to summarize what emerged from these workshops in terms of our findings. Areas for improvement suggested for our participants. The first one is supporting interest-based sociality, right? As we know that autistic sociality often revolves around specific and focused interests, participants were keen to have features and to have support for that. As you've seen now, platforms should offer connections based on interests, maybe in the form of recommendations of people who have the same interest, or by showing the content which would be pre-chosen on the basis of users' interest. The second one and big one was supporting content control. A lot of different suggestions there, but for example, users should be able to personalize their feed according to relevance, right? The user should decide what they're interested in rather than an algorithm. Also, there was a suggestion to help filter out the amount of content which is thrown at us as social media users. We should be able to remove audio or visual and moving images, as we've just seen. We should be able to temporarily block specific hashtags or content from strangers. And basically, we should be able to easily avoid uninteresting and rude and fraudulent content. Here, you already see that some of the suggestions apply to all of us as users, right? It's not that just autistic people who would benefit from this one, for example, supporting content control. The next one, supporting expression of meaning and content, is somewhat more tailored to this group. We've seen requests for features that would clarify what emojis mean. Some features would propose alternative emojis, such as not facial emojis, to convey emotions, and also an opportunity for users themselves to create particular emojis. Another suggestion was to facilitate sharing drafts of a post. If a user is creating a post, then they could share the draft with an interpreter, which would be engaged in this sort of collaborative crafting of the post. They would advise them on particular things. That was back in 2020. We know that in part AI assistants are already used to do this. Another suggestion here was that platforms should allow users to edit content after it has been posted, an ability to correct things, which even at the moment is not given by all platforms. Last but not least, the also very popular area was supporting the establishment of boundaries, which for the most part related to mental health, ensuring mental well-being as we engage with social media. This has to do, of course, with this idea that social media in principle are designed as an addictive platform, right? We cannot easily disengage. Then we become overwhelmed with the content and we cannot stop posting or scrolling. More often than not, we perceive that we have to reply urgently rather than leaving it till later. On the one hand, there was suggestion to have personalized reminders in case a user wants to be signaled when they have unread content or outstanding messages that they need to reply to. And they should be able to plan the content in advance. Other participants said that if a user has been using a particular platform for significant time, is it clear that they have been engaging mostly with negative content, then there should be some kind of automatic suggestions to stop or to propose positive content to counteract the negative content they've seen. Another suggestion was in terms of really established boundaries, in terms of letting others know that this particular user wants to take a break and they're not going to engage for some time in using the platform. And then they shouldn't expect a reply. So the network should not expect a reply. These are some of the features, right? As you can see, they evolve around the idea of greater control over the content we are presented with, who we interact with, strangers, people we know, and also the quality and the amount of time we spend on social media. These are our participants. Now, could we see results of the poll to see what we have? Okay, so we have tone indicators, and emojis are great, but sometimes people use them sarcastically. So clearer algorithms as to why certain content is shown allow more control as what we see. Yes, that again resonates with the saying voiced by our participants. Less cluttered, less adverts. Another area I didn't have time to go into is a request for more privacy control. Again, it goes across all users. It would benefit all of us significantly. Less sudden, startling sounds when scrolling, and also agree with the points we raised. Thank you. Quite a few things. They were back 4 years ago. They're still quite topical now. So there is some urgency to take our findings and to translate them in some sort of guidance for software developers, but also for people who design these platforms, for example, to put standalone websites for peer-to-peer interaction among autistic adults. Thank you. We have those areas which you identify there, which need improvement and need further work on. What did we do with our findings? First of all, what we did in the project, how we did it, there is a lay public summary available, which you can see on the link. This is quite extensive, detailed report for each stage of the project. Also, we took the findings from this group of participants to design further workshops. And there were 2 sets of workshops. First one would be workshops with software designers and more autistic people, developed as a sort of collaboration between these 2 groups to decide what should go into the guidance. Right, the result was Toolkit 1 for software designers, what they should keep an eye on, how they should work with autistic people to improve design. The second set of workshops was with autistic people, charity representatives, and digital managers. The idea here is that these groups may not have technical expertise in software design, but they would still benefit from the knowledge of these improvements, right? How to do them. Because some platforms allow customizations, right? There are certain things you can do with Facebook to customize it a bit. Or there might be standalone websites which should be designed with these principles in mind. In that sense, we have 2 toolkits, one for designers and one for third and public sector organizations. The important thing, for example, for the toolkit in terms of software designers is that it's not just about a list of features which should be implemented, right? Because there's huge variability there. Importantly, it is about the way of working with autistic participants to improve design, right? How to engage people and how to discuss particular areas of improvement. For example, it involved these sort of more general lessons we had from the workshops, going from the specific features to what can we learn from the work we did. In this sense, it's helpful to go back to an observation by a researcher and anthropologist, Elizabeth Pine, who for her PhD on autistic communication, she worked with autistic adolescents in a youth camp. She spent the summer there, and she said that after participating in this camp, she learned a set of features and a set of practices for how to engage autistic young people in storytelling activity, which could then improve their well-being and socializing. She got some knowledge. But when she tried to apply that knowledge later to set up similar camps across the country, it didn't work. What she says that the magic ingredient in the first of the primary camp she participated was basically trust. The trust that the organizers developed with the young people there and then. As for our case, I think, because long-term engagement is really important, not just coming in and engaging 15, 20 people, taking the results and going elsewhere. In our case, it was for more than 18 months. We had a few participants whom we consulted before submitting the proposal. Then we involved them as members of our advisory board. An advisory board met regularly throughout the project, right? Before we collected the data, once we collected the data, we discussed the results. So that kind of ongoing engagement. We also had autistic researcher on the team, which helped to create rapport. Participants were able to choose whether they would be interviewed by autistic or non-autistic person. All of that kind of contributed to trust and to the sense of connection as well, which I'm going to cover in a minute. The second point was the fact that we offered structure. The activities were quite structured. You remember there would be cards with already some evidence, not just start reflecting from zero. There was a certain structure there, but at the same time, we gave a lot of room for creativity in terms of how participants want to arrange the cards, the kind of features they propose, and also what they're comfortable with. Feedback from workshop 1 informed the structure for workshop 2. And then that's what we mean under the agreed rules of participation. Just to say that there was something else, which I think is also really important. Not only the specific suggestions for how to improve things, but also the sense of connection among participants themselves. And we're not the first research project who observed this. We know there are higher rates of loneliness among autistic people. As a result, here people mention the need to be involved. As we have here, have an observation. I have ended up grouped with such a fantastic group of creative autistic women. I am learning that I'm not alone, though. It would be good if participants could have a group online so that we could talk more. And indeed, in the case of our participants, one of the participants actually created such a group. And then it has been, much to my surprise, so it could have been daunting, we appreciate at the start, an enjoyable and rewarding experience, and not nearly as stressful as I had envisaged. Again, here references to us as a group, right? We all had a blast and made me think about social media and promoting neurological diversity. All picked out some very good suggestions about how we struggle. Okay, so the sense of collaboration, sense of community, and also humor. Humor was pervasive through 3 workshops, collaboration and humor. Remember that participants talked about encountering rude and offensive content, right? This was a significant issue. One of our participants proposed creating a social media feature which would reward positive pro-social behavior, right? There would be some kind of prize or reward. But they struggled to name it. Then this collaborative ethos kicked in, and we can see it there. We have a facilitator asking, John, I'm going to ask you the same question again. If you had to give this a title or name, John honestly couldn't think of one that didn't sound cheesy. Then someone else comes in and says, don't be a dick. Facilitator says, so what do you think about that, John? John, that's pretty accurate, yeah. Don't be a dick. Win prizes. Accidentally or not, this is also a title of our next paper, which is currently in draft. Hopefully, we will see it in print soon. I think I stop here. Thank you very much for listening. I'm ready for your questions. And if you want any further information, you can go to our website or please email me and I can send you copies of the toolkit that we have.
Thank you so much, Nelya. That was really interesting. And it's so great to know that work is going on in this area. Like most things, anything that support people with autism typically would help people who do not have autism. And I think a lot of these things are quite universal. I would like to open up questions to the audience now. Just for those of you who know, I will be sending the research papers across if you signed up via the Eventbrite link. And we can also send the slides, so you will get them as well. If any of you have a question, I have some myself. I'm going to ask, the first question is, how did long-term engagement with autistic individuals shape the study's findings?
In different ways, there are two things, right? We have input from participants. We interview people, right? Before we analyze and say, these are the results, right? We take the preliminary findings to our advisory board. And we say, for example, for the interviews, we find out the themes, right? Does it resonate with you? Is this interpretation too much? Because in our case, we're social scientists, and in any case of research, there is interpretation going, right? We wanted to make sure it resonates with people on board. Then we go back, we take the feedback from the board, and we incorporate it into the way we look at things and into the result. But also a more direct way, perhaps, is that we ask our board members if they would be interested in actually co-authoring a paper with us. There was a volunteer, and the person read again the specific findings for publication, again, suggested tweaks and improvement. In that sense, we have a more direct voice from our participants.
Cool. Thank you for that. Got a question from the audience. And what sort of prizes would be given for pro-social content? Who would pay for them?
I don't know. It's just one of the features suggested by participants, and he didn't elaborate on that. But some sort of token, a token for your good behavior.
I'm a sucker for online badges, honestly. Every time I use a lot of health apps, and even though the little kind of trophy they give me is worthless, I still find it beneficial. Another thing is that I'm a Google Maps local community member, and you get stars for how good you are. The more kind of positive comments, the more beneficial. People can up things and they get more exposure. We do have, hopefully, another one. Don't we have a right for neuro-inclusivity online? If not, why? What do you think that question means? Is it like a legal right? Maybe a bit more information is needed to answer that one. The other one is certificates for positive engagement, perhaps good on CV. I know on LinkedIn you do get online certificates now, so that's definitely something which is possible. Nelya, do you have any ideas of things that you would personally find appealing to you as some sort of online reward?
I was more thinking of my daughter who is collecting stickers.
Yeah, I love
badges, stickers, but some sort of rating, right? Rating of user with a higher rating gives some sort of with a higher rating of good behavior, if that put as an evidence on their profile.
I don't know if you've seen the Black Mirror episode where you get the social media and you go up in ranks. A little bit like a system that they use in parts of China. With all things, there is a chance of them being used for bad. Is there anything we could do to mitigate it? For instance, people put likes and dislikes, and then people got obsessed with them, into the point where Instagram has now taken them away for some content creators.
Yeah, how to actually engineer them? Who decides? Do you just completely leave it open, or do you have a moderation in place for decision making at this stage? I wouldn't know.
That's fair enough. Okay, how about this one? And this is another one from myself. Were there any surprising findings about autistic social media use? Maybe things that you weren't really expecting, or maybe differed considerably to their neurotypical counterparts?
I would say there are findings which people who do not know about neurodiversity would find surprising. We know there is autistic sociality, but we have to almost prove it and fight for it often. But we found that on Twitter, that there are very active and very prolific communities which socialize without issues, right? In fact, when there's advocacy communities, they are particularly strong. I think that's the message which we have to keep putting forward, right? Basically, there is nothing surprising in that autistic people socialize, and they socialize well, and they do it online. It's just that for some people, for some clinicians, maybe this can be a surprise.
Thank you. We've got two more questions I'd like to end on. The first one being, how do we put the responsibility on creators of social media platforms to engage with this conversation? Basically, how do we not preach to the converted and we get the people who can actually have decision-making power to read your toolkit?
In the case of us as researchers who also don't have all the power, the way is just to keep trying. We created the toolkits. We will have, if we get enough funding, further workshops and further engagements to hopefully involving policymakers as well as to what kind of guidance is needed to make sure we have this change. Hopefully, as we discussed, we need to be able to spread this message widely to employers, for example, who use digital platforms often for workplace communication. It's the way those digital networks are designed, which is also important, right? I cannot say at the moment that we have Facebook participating in our workshops and saying that they will do change, but we are at the start, right? Hopefully among the software designers who come to our workshops, there will be people who would like to spread the message and to engage more players with more powers, so to speak.
I think you're doing the hard work for them, so it makes sense for them to get involved. I wonder if you have any kind of comments on the recent pushback with Facebook and the US in general around kind of DEI. Do you think that might have any repercussions on the work you're doing?
I don't know. Well, it has to be seen with the current climate, right? I can't predict what will happen in 2 or 3 months.
This one is, I think, quite interesting, and it's about the kind of contradiction between co-occurring neurodivergence. Is there a potential clash between the needs of autistics, who typically take things a bit more literal, and dyslexics, who might regard the former as annoying? This could also be branched out to ADHD, dyspraxia, any sort of alternative cognitive processing.
On the face of it, yes, right? There are these diverging tendencies, but we know that autism is such a vast field of different developmental differences. We know that there are autistic people who are dyslexic. In fact, we had a person who was dyslexic and autistic in the workshop. But is it a clash? Basically, the question is, when does it matter? And how can we communicate around it? On paper, it does look like it's a clash. In practice, for example, in the workshop, it's all about mutually agreed rules for communicating. As soon as we set those up, and they have to be set up in consultation, we don't know things at the outset, then I would say there's no clash. There are ways around it.
If you are interested in watching this later, as well as our whole heap of catalog, do go onto our YouTube channel, which you can just find by typing exceptional individuals. We've got so much more on this section. We've done some interesting ones previously on inclusive design, which I think complements this session really nicely. We also have our own online community, very small and very humble, but typically quite positive. So you're all very welcome. Just search Autistic Opportunities on Facebook if you'd like to join. We also have a LinkedIn one, which is aimed at job seekers and more professional opportunities. Again, it's run by autistic individuals for autistic individuals. Hopefully it's a nice, safe space. I'd just like to end by saying a massive thank you to Nelya. Thank you so much for the amazing work you're doing in the autism community. It's very much appreciated, and also for sharing your time with us today. It's been really great to listen to you and hear your insights.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the questions.
All right, brilliant. Thank you everyone for also attending. It's been great.